Peaceful Patty, and we're ready for story number 4. Several hundred years after God's promise to Abraham, it looked like things had gotten way off track. When God told Abraham to leave his home, he promised to give him a new land in Canaan. It was going to be a great land. It was supposed to remind God's people of the garden they once had. It would be sweet and refreshing with plenty of milk and honey. But Abraham and his sons never really possessed the land that they were promised. And now it was 400 years later, and they were slaves in Egypt. How Abraham's family got to Egypt is a long story, but here's the short version. They went to Egypt because there was a famine in Canaan, and when they got to Egypt, Jacob's sons found their long-lost brother Joseph, who helped get them food and a place to live, even though he was there because his 10 older brothers had been jealous and sold him into slavery after they almost killed him because of his fancy coat. I told you, it was a long story. Well, delivering them from famine was one thing. That's when Israel's family was still pretty small. Israel, by the way, was Jacob's new name. I guess everyone needed 2 names back then. But hundreds of years later, the family was huge. How would God save a couple million people from slavery? It's not like he could just turn the Nile River into blood and send frogs and gnats and flies and disease and boils and hail and locusts and darkness and death until the king of Egypt let them go. Actually, that's exactly what God did. God raised up Moses to deliver his people, but in reality, God did all the work. He sent the plagues. He led the people with fire and cloud. He made the sea turn to dry land so the Israelites could walk through. And he turned the dry land back to sea when the Egyptians tried to cross over. It seemed that no matter what the Israelites did or what everyone else did to them, God always found a way to save his people. That's the end of story 4, and we'll go to Bible Betty.
Thanks, Peaceful Patty. In chapter 3, we learned that God's plan to bring his people back to the garden was extended to one man and to the descendants of Abraham. And now God's promise is not just to Abraham's family, but to the entire nation of Israel. And he used Moses to lead his people to the promised land. And in the promised land, they were going to encounter God's presence again, just like he was when he was in the garden. And God is continuing to save his people despite their many sins. We'll see you next time for chapter 5.